So, in this video, we're going to be looking at the dominance theory. This is the Marmite of dog training. Some trainers swear by it, whereas others are going to swear at you just for bringing it up in a sentence. It's all over social media. As soon as anyone posts any sort of behavioural issue, there's always someone that jumps on to say your dog's trying to be dominant. These behaviours include pulling on the lead, running out of the door, guarding food and other resources, and even aggression towards people and dogs. Even some very famous TV dog trainers use this in every other sentence. But where did this theory come from? Do dogs actually have a dominance hierarchy? And should we apply the dominance theory to our dog training? Let's find out. So, where did the dominance theory come from? Well, humans have had an obsession with dominance in animals for well over 100 years now. The first study was in 1903, where they looked at dominance in chickens. For dogs, it kind of started back in the 1930s to 1940s. A researcher called Rudolf Schenkel was observing wolves in captivity. He observed that these wolves would fight in order to gain dominance over one another, and from these observations, the dominance theory started finding its way into dog training. Next, we had David Mech. Mech was a research biologist that specialised in studying wolves. In the 1970s, he published a book called The Wolf: Ecology and Behaviour of an Endangered Species. In this book, he introduced the concept of an alpha male, and this was all while observing wolves in captivity. From this, the dominance theory found its way into training ethology, with the suggestion that dogs are trying to dominate us, and therefore we should try to be more dominant than them by regulating access to their resources, by using corrections, and in some cases even using brute force. Barry Eaton, who was a dog trainer and the author of Dominance in Dogs, Fact or Fiction, summarises how these theories found their way into dog training. And he did this in 4 steps. First, the wolf structure is entirely explained by linear dominance, a linear dominance hierarchy in which there is a constant battle to be the alpha dog and dominate the rest of the pack. Second, domestic dogs are descended from wolves, and therefore the same must apply to them. Third, domestic dogs are trying to dominate us. And fourth, we should issue a preemptive strike to dominate dogs by enforcing strict rules and harshly. So, to summarise, the dominance theory in dog training related from a number of studies in the 20th century that were carried out in captive wolves. Given that wolves and dogs share 99.96 of the same genes, it was assumed that dogs must share the same traits as those displayed by captive wolves, therefore creating the dominance dog training theory. So let's look at the link between wolves and dogs. So let's break this down. As previously mentioned, the dominance theory originates from studies carried out on captive wolves. These were kept together for many years. The domestic dog is descended from the wolf, and it is because of that it is often assumed that its capacity to form social relations is similar to that of the wolf. However, evolutionary biologist Dr. Raymond Coppinger states that dogs may well be closely related to wolves, but that doesn't mean they behave like wolves. He also says that people are closely related to chimps, but that doesn't make us a subspecies of chimpanzees, nor does it mean we behave like them. However, this statement is somewhat flawed. Dogs and wolves can successfully mate and even conceive a puppy, which means they must be closer on the evolutionary scale than humans and chimpanzees. It's interesting to note that chimpanzees and humans share 98.8% of their DNA compared to 99.96% between wolves and dogs. So in contrast to wolves, whose socialization to humans has to begin before their eyes open at 10 days old, the time window for socialization in dogs closes around about 12 weeks. Wolf puppies need to spend at least 20 hours a day with their human carer for them to be socialised successfully. Those that spent 12 hours a day with humans went on to be as wary of people as pups with no human contact were. They would also choose canid companion over humans, different from how studied group of dogs acted. Importantly, one study conducted between 2001 and 2003 raised 13 grey wolf puppies and 11 domestic dog pups and compared their behaviour between 3 and 9 weeks of age. When handled by an unfamiliar person, the wolf pups reacted aggressively 29% of the time, growling, biting, etc., compared to no aggressive reactions from all of the dog puppies. Studies have compared the behaviour of captive dogs and wolves raised in the same environment and have reported a higher rate of potentially injurious aggression in some dog breeds than in wolves. So dogs actually seem to be less likely to share food with subordinates, which actually suggests that dogs may have a steeper hierarchy than wolves. So although wolves and dogs are closely related and share a lot of the same genetical information, it doesn't mean that they are going to display the same behaviours or social structure. Wolf puppies, for example, have a smaller socialisation window, and even when raised in the same circumstances and socialised in the same way as domestic dogs, puppies behave very differently around people. So one of the major downsides or flaws to this study in dominance is that it's not similar to the pack structure that you would find in wild wolves. For starters, captive wolf packs usually include wolves that aren't related. When the pack was first formed, these are from different sources and they can breed at will. Wild packs, however, usually consist of a family unit, a breeding pair and offspring ages between 1 and 3 years old. There are some alterations that can be seen in wolf packs sometimes. For example, unrelated wolves can sometimes be adopted into the pack, or they can replace a deceased parent. This is going to affect the social dynamics of a group and isn't a true representation of what you would actually find in the wild. Wild wolves have a division of labour system. This is where the females predominantly care for the pups and for defence, whereas the males are used for food provisioning and foraging for food. The wolves in captivity are kept together for many years, whereas in the wild, wolves normally disperse from the pack between 9 months and 3 years old. It's also important to mention that interactions between wild wolves are much calmer than those described for captive ones. So to summarise this, although the studies conducted on captive wolves showed that they were fighting to gain dominance over one another, it isn't right to apply these same principles to wild wolves. The environment, social dynamics, and relationship between them are all completely different to what you would find naturally. Therefore, you can see why it wouldn't be fair to apply these principles to the domestic dog either, given that the results for these studies aren't even true representation of wild wolves. So let's look at dogs. Let's see if they actually have a hierarchy system and what it looks like. So similar to wolves, an age-based order can be found in dogs, which suggests that dogs have inherited some relevant social rules from their wild ancestors. Social groups in domestic dogs aren't formed based on dominance, but rather a dyadic relation between individuals and based on interactions and behaviour such as play and affiliation. A recent study based on detailed analysis of social interactions recorded over an extended period found a linear dominance hierarchy in a large pack of unowned free-ranging dogs in Italy. This was further backed up in 2017 by Bonanni et al., who found statistically significant evidence of linear dominance hierarchies in 4 packs of unowned domestic dogs in 3 different areas of Italy. A linear dominance hierarchy model would essentially look like a transitive relationship. So essentially, if dog A is dominant over dog B, and dog B is dominant over dog C, then dog A is also dominant over dog C. So in dogs, you would see dominant behaviors towards dogs below them and submissive behaviors towards those above. Bonanni went on to list several behavior patterns that were observed in the assessment of dog structure status. Those that were considered displays of dominance included high body posture, head over, mounting, and pinning. Agnostic submissive behaviors included avoiding eye contact, flattening ears, low body posture, and lying down on their backs. Dr. Ian Dunbar, who was founder of the Association of Pet Dog Trainers, observed that in litters there was lots of fighting. And this resulted in dogs that were bullies and others that were wimps. This established a hierarchy system that then didn't change for 10 years when those litters were kept together. However, when litters were put together, this fighting didn't happen between those litters or happened much less. He called this developmental non-contest. So such a big difference between ages and size meant that they weren't going to fight between each other. Interestingly, at around 4.5 months to 10 months, adult dogs start to harass puppies by doing things like removing items and not putting up with their puppy-like behaviours like they did before. The puppies learn to then apologise to adult dogs before this actually happens, and these are known as appeasement behaviours. So interestingly, this form of socialisation is taught from other dogs, and it's not actually an intrusive way. It wasn't aggressive at all, and there wasn't any fighting. The reason for this hierarchy system is survival. No pack member wants an injured or lame pack member. So according to Dr. Ian Dunbar, the point of having a hierarchy system is to prevent fights from happening and not to have a reason to fight. So should we use dominance in our training? So dominance is a term often used in literature and by dog owners is a way to describe characteristics of an individual dog. It is also commonly suggested that a desire to be dominant actually derives from behaviour, especially aggression in the domestic dog. A number of behaviours have been identified as dominant type behaviours, such as pulling on the lead, passing through doorways first, chewing household objects, begging for food, or sleeping on the furniture. There may be reasons why a dog might display aggression. However, this is rarely due to trying to be a dominant dog. This is usually because they're uncomfortable, in pain, or even scared. Aggression is natural behaviour for dogs. For example, if they have a high value resource that they don't want to give up, it could result in displays of aggression depending on the dog. If a dog had to fend for themselves, then this kind of behaviour would allow them to keep hold of the important resource, such as food, which would allow them to survive. This is known as resource guarding. A dog will often show signs of stress before they actually resort to any form of aggression. If these signs are ignored, then the behaviours will often escalate. Traditional techniques suggest these behaviours need to be corrected by becoming the boss, or the alpha. Examples of corrections include alpha rolling, pinning the dog to the ground, forcing the dog to sit down, hitting or even kicking the dog. It has actually been proven that these techniques actually increase the likelihood that a dog will be aggressive, which makes sense because they are going to offer the lower level appeasement behaviours that we've mentioned earlier, and they haven't worked, so they've had to escalate them to aggression. This also doesn't address any of the underlying emotional responses that prompted them to display these behaviours in the first place. So there is no guarantee that the techniques will work for every dog. A study by Heron, Schoffer and Reisner in 2009 looked at 140 owners' training methods and the reactions that the dogs displayed. Results showed that indirect confrontation, such as staring down, growling at the dogs, resulted in aggressive responses from at least a quarter of the dogs, with methods such as alpha rolling also eliciting aggressive responses. So as mentioned, it is very rare for a dog to display aggression due to dominance. Now, we used to call this dominance aggression, whereas now it is known as impulse control aggression. This kind of aggression is due to a dog having an abnormal reaction to normal cues in the environment. So rather than having a normal response, the anxiety of change in their current environment moves them to act out of context and display aggression towards a person or an animal. This relates to access and control, hence previously known as dominance aggression. As mentioned, this is an abnormality. These are not confident dogs, and this behaviour doesn't come from confidence, it comes from anxiety. And because they're unable to settle, read and respond to the environment in a normal way. So let's try and summarise what we've talked about. Now, going right back to the start, looking at the study of wolves in captivity, David Mech, who, as you'll remember, wrote that book in the 1970s, has since tried to get that book unpublished. He's admitted that he got it wrong. In his recent book called Alpha Status, Dominance and Division of Labour in Wolf Packs, he says, attempting to apply information about the behaviour of unrelated captive wolves to the familiar structure of a natural pack has resulted in considerable confusion. He then goes on to say that studying captive wolves and applying that logic to wild wolves is the same as trying to study the human family dynamics by studying humans in refugee camps. The concept of dominance is hugely debated by both scientists and dog trainers, especially as some dog trainers use the dominance theory as the base for their behavioural work. Now, although we've seen evidence to show that there is some sort of a linear hierarchy in both wolves and dogs, it's difficult to find any real observable truth. This is because the same observed interactions between dogs and wolves could be completely different when interpreted by different people. For one person, it could be interpreted as a dominance hierarchy, whereas from another person, this could be an outcome of learning theory. So, unless we ever learn to actually talk to dogs, we're never going to find out what they think or why they behave the way they do. However, instead of focusing on whether dogs are trying to be dominant and labeling things as dominant, what we actually want to be doing is focusing on the promotion of welfare-friendly dog training methods.